Aang tries to learn firebending. Destruction results, and he's left doubtful as to whether he ever wants to firebend again. This is Avatar Explained for episode 116, The Deserter. Part 1. Synopsis. This is a much better episode than the previous two. It shows how the series is really getting on track. This may be a show that makes a few missteps, but it always lands on its feet. Team Avatar goes to a Fire Nation festival. Sokka is not fond of the idea, but Aang says that he needs to go so he can learn firebending, because as the Avatar, that is one of the 4 elements he needs to master, and considering that the Fire Nation government wants to kill him, he knows that it will be quite a challenge to master firebending. Aang plays around at the festival. They have a good time at first, but Aang jumps to protect Katara, even though she's not in any real danger, and in doing so he exposes them. The Fire Nation troops chase after them, and they only escape because they have the help of a rogue firebender, someone who has deserted the Fire Nation military. But he is not the titular deserter of this episode. No, that is Zhang, a firebending master, whom Aang highly hopes that he will be able to learn firebending from. However, it does not exactly go that easily. Zhang refuses to train Aang at first because Aang does not know earthbending or waterbending. Apparently, Zhang can discern this just from how Aang moves, just from how he carries himself. But Aang persists. And with the help of Avatar Roku, he convinces Zhang to train him in firebending. But Aang does not listen. Zhang is right when he says that Aang does not care about discipline. He does not care about the burden of firebending. He just wants to shoot fire out of his fingertips. This eventually costs Aang when he accidentally burns Katara while practicing his firebending. Sokka tackles him and declares that Aang burned his sister. Katara is alright in the end. She discovers she has healing abilities. Quite a neat little contrast to the destruction Aang unleashes. However, Aang is ultimately able to win the day by taking advantage of someone whose destructive tendencies are far greater than his own, that being Admiral Zhao. Zhao is, of course, searching to capture the Avatar, and he's confident about his chances. He has all these ships, and he knows that Zhang won't actually attack him, because Zhao was once Zhang's student, and he's disappointed by how Zhang has turned away from the aggressive side of firebending. However, Zhao proves how destructive that aggressive side of firebending can be. Aang taunts him, jumping from ship to ship to ship. Zhao keeps launching fire, and eventually Zhao burns all his ships. At the end, Aang says, "You've lost this battle, Zhao." Zhao responds, "What are you talking about? You haven't even thrown a punch." "But you have," Aang says. And Zhao looks at the destruction he's caused. It's a pleasant way to end the episode, but it doesn't heal Aang's guilt. He still knows it's his fault that he burned Katara. He should have listened to Zhang. He should have done what he was told, but he didn't. He was too excitable, he was too proud of his new abilities, and everyone paid the price for it. Part 2. Analysis. After the relatively lighter tones of the last 2 episodes, this one marks a welcome return to the more grim and dour, even pessimistic elements of the series. And it is a welcome return, as this is a much better episode than we've gotten recently. There's a cynical view of firebending here. Zhang declares that it is innately destructive. He calls it a curse. He thinks of it as a burden that he has to bear. He yearns to be a waterbender or an earthbender, someone whose powers are constructive instead of destructive. This whole idea of firebending being destructive is strewn throughout the episode. We have Aang's powers, we have Zhang's monologue about the destructive power of firebending, and his own doubt, almost guilt about his powers. And we have Zhao destroying all his own ships with firebending. There's almost a sense in this episode that there's something wrong with firebending, that it's less natural than the others. And that is foreboding. In the past, there's been the sense that balance is needed, that balance always needs to be restored, that the 4 elements and the 4 nations should be equal, that there's nothing wrong with any of the elements innately. But this episode seems to suggest that there is something wrong with firebending. That's a curse, that it's a burden, that it's a problem that one must solve. Zhang doesn't think of it as a power he has. He doesn't like being a firebender. The whole idea has crushed him. And the shadow this episode casts over firebending is something that the show will have to deal with going forward. It's something that Aang will have to deal with going forward. He doesn't ever want to firebend again by the end of this episode. Of course, he needs to. That is part of being an avatar. He needs to master all the elements, but here we see him shirk those duties. He's fine with being the avatar, but he refuses to master firebending. He doesn't want anything to do with that. His perspective on it is at least as dim as Zhang's perspective, if not more so. He doesn't trust the element, and more importantly, he doesn't trust himself with the element. This is also a great world-building episode, with the whole idea of firebending being explored in depth for the first time, and also the healing powers of waterbending being introduced. Katara has already grown so much as a waterbender since the beginning of the show, when she struggles to pull off even basic waterbending moves, but this episode marks a significant point in that evolution. She gains these healing powers. When she's asked when she got them, she says she's kind of always known she had them, but she never really had to put them into practice until she was burned by Aang. So that's a nice addition to the whole show's idea of waterbending, and what it can do and what it's capable of. And I love the contrast between the destruction of firebending and the healing powers of waterbending. We also get more here about Zhao, and the show really delves in deeply to how his core flaw, his fatal flaw, if you will, is his arrogance. It's his desperation. It's his unwillingness to ever hold back. He has no restraint, as Zhang says. In this episode, he burns all the ships. In the first episode we see him, episode 103, the Southern Air Temple, his lack of restraint is what leads him to fight an Agni Kai with Zuko. Even though Zuko is a nobody at this point, he's a banished prince. He's a teenager. Zhao does not have to give him the time of day, but he does, because Zhao is lured in by Zuko. He can't refuse that challenge. It burns in him. Zhao will never stop. He is relentless. This is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because it gives him that drive that's allowed him to rise through the ranks. But it's a curse because he doesn't know how to stop. He just keeps attacking and attacking and striving, even if it's not good for him or those around him. And this is something we will continue to see as the show progresses. Also, one more detail that I really like. It's well-constructed foreshadowing how Aang's foolishness and his lack of restraint cost him at the Fire Festival. He doesn't think, he doesn't hold back, he just leaps ahead and saves Katara, even though she's not really in danger, putting them all in jeopardy. This reflects how he will put Katara in great harm later in the episode because he doesn't think, he doesn't hesitate. He just jumps ahead and decides to test his firebending prowess, to see what he can do, to see what powers he can use. And Katara pays for it, and Aang pays for it too, psychologically. He doesn't trust himself. Katara might be able to heal her hands where she was burned with her newfound healing powers, but Aang, his psychological wound is not going to be healed that easily. He knows how dangerous he's been with firebending, and he'll have a difficult time moving past this incident going forward. Part 3. Context. There are a few episodes we need to talk about here if we want to fully appreciate how well this episode, The Deserters, works in context. One of them is The Old Masters, episode 319. This is where Zhang appears, and he uses his firebending prowess throughout the last few episodes of the show to take back Ba Sing Se and defeat the Fire Nation. We see him finally using his powers in an offensive way again. although this time he's doing it for good and against the Fire Nation, instead of using his powers to serve the Fire Nation. Another episode we need to talk about is 120, The Siege of the North Part 2. Zhao's relentlessness and his lack of hesitation and his lack of restraint leads him down the path to getting sucked into the spirit world, where he's not seen again until the Legend of Korra 70 years later. He doesn't have to capture the moon. He doesn't have to kill the moon. He's already highly ranked. He already has a certain place of respect and dignity in the history of the Fire Nation. But that's not good enough for him. He wants more. He wants to be renowned. He wants the whole of the world to respect him and bow to him and know how impressive he is. If he had just pulled back, if he had just waited and hesitated, none of this would have happened. So that's a nice example of how his fatal flaw leads to his downfall. It's tragic almost. But the episode we definitely need to talk about, the episode that matters more than the other two I've listed prior, is episode 313, The Firebending Masters. This is an episode that completely revolutionizes how firebending is portrayed in the show. In The Firebending Masters, this whole idea that firebending is a curse, that it's a burden to bear, is shown to be false. Firebending does not have to be destructive. It's just life, it's energy, it's passion. It's like the sun. It's not evil, it's not corrupt, not inherently. People can use it in corrupt ways, but there is nothing wrong with the element itself. After how darkly firebending is portrayed in this episode, the Firebending Masters has a lot of work to do to prove that no, there is nothing wrong with firebending, that it can be used for good just as much as any other element, as long as it's not powered by rage and hatred. But it puts in that work, and as a result, it is, if you ask me, the best episode of the show. It's the most cathartic, and it's the most satisfying, at least for me. And part of the reason why it is so cathartic, and why it is so satisfying, comes from this episode. This episode sets up a puzzle, it sets up a conundrum, it sets up an ethical dilemma. But the Firebending Masters not only solves it, but makes it look like it wasn't a dilemma after all. Which could feel really cheap and really shallow, but it's earned. It's powerful, it's passionate, it's revelatory. It's like those moments in your life when you think everything's in darkness, you think everything's confusing, and then suddenly it all makes sense. It all falls into place. It's a burning, passionate, lovely moment of revelation for not only Aang, but also for Zuko. Aang swears in The Deserter to never firebend again. In fact, the title of the episode, The Deserter, may directly refer to Zhang, but it could also refer to Aang's desertion of his duties to master firebending. It takes a lot of work for him to move past that blockage and finally be able to firebend again, and the Firebending Masters elegantly and eloquently puts him in a place where he can become a firebending master himself, where he can learn the element and learn to appreciate it, learn to not be afraid of it or think of it as something innately horrible and corrupting. Every episode in this show matters and sets up later episodes, but there are a few episodes that set up later episodes quite as effectively and powerfully as The Deserter sets up episode 313, The Firebending Masters. So thank you for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you liked what you saw today and you want to see more videos like this and you can afford to support me. Even a little money is a big help. Keep watching Avatar. It really is a fantastic show. It's one of the best shows of all time. And there's always something new every time you watch it. And don't forget to tune in for the next Avatar Explained video. I swear it will be coming soon. You won't have to wait long. Thanks again. Adios, comrades.